unless we green and we continue to green, we offer the stumpness of our life, the same old, same old. And that becomes a yoke of religion. And that, dear friend, is what I think the modern church in America might be guilty of, is offering the stump of a religion rather than the greening, beautiful tendrils of Jesus Christ.
Well, hello and welcome to the Being Formed podcast. I'm your host, Adam Ormord. Today feels especially meaningful for me because I get to welcome back to the show someone who has shaped my life in more ways than I can count. My guest is Stephen W. Smith, author, mentor, and founder of The Potter's Inn. Steve and his wife, Gwen, have spent decades offering rest and guidance and deep soul care to leaders around the world. Their ministry was profoundly influential in my own formation, and LifePoint Resources exists in many ways because of their faithful, tender work. Steve is the author of many books that have helped reshape the landscape of spiritual formation and soul care. And now he's stepping into a new chapter with his latest book, his first collection of poetry. It's called Greening, Poems in the Unfolding of Our Lives. Influenced by poets like Mary Oliver and many, many more, Steve is exploring how poetry helps us listen to our lives with greater honesty, gentleness, and imagination. In this conversation, Steve shares about the surprising greening or the resurgence happening in his own soul and how all of this is shaping his work today. This is a tender and deeply human conversation with someone I consider a mentor and a friend. I'm so glad you're here for it. So let's dive in. Stephen W. Smith, it feels so special to have you back on the podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm so glad to be connected with you and to our listeners today, and to know you're in Colorado makes me homesick.
This is where I met you, man. So I am deeply connected to you being here in Colorado, up in the mountains of Divide, where we first met at the Potter's Inn, at the retreat center up there. This is actually the second time, too, that you have graced the Being Formed podcast with your presence, your wisdom, and thank you. That means that you're the person who's been on here the most, Steve.
Oh man, I'm glad to set another record. But you know what? I love the spirit of your podcast, Adam, because in so many ways, your podcast is a continuation of our podcast that we pioneered. And then I stopped a few years ago when I built my exit ramp to begin repositioning and retiring. So it just feels like the message is carrying on. And I love your guest and how you're doing it. Congratulations.
That's really high praise, because I would definitely say I looked up to you, still do. You're a mentor to me. I loved your podcast. I loved your guests. So if this is considered a continuation of that, I feel like I've done my job and God has been so good. You know, we're talking a little bit about the Potter's Inn, and I'm curious though, I'd love to bring in just a tiny bit of your story, Steve, into the conversation. Way back when, how did the ministry of soul care through the Potter's Inn first come to life in you and Gwen?
Potter's Inn, the name, the vision, the concept, the idea was birthed in one single spiritual direction session with a man named Dallas Willard. I fled to a monastery. I was a mega pastor in North Carolina, hit a wall. Gwen and I were spiraling in our marriage. We had 4 children under 8 years old. I was preaching my heart out 3 times on Sunday, one again on Wednesday. That was the time in my life I was a Baptist. Now I call myself a recovering Baptist. And I fled to Sierra Madre, California, to the Passionate Retreat Center, where Dallas Willard had huddled about 12 broken, screwed up, messed up pastors. And I spent a month with him. And in that session, I just knew I needed to redo, unlearn, begin again, and start again in the slow work of God and how to do ministry from a healthier place.
Hmm. Do you remember what year that was?
1996, it was the year that Divine Conspiracy came out. In fact, I got one of the first copies that Dallas
Yeah.
signed. So he was my mentor, and in many ways still is, among with others that you and I share together.
Yes. I would call him my mentor as well. When I walked the Camino this summer up in northern Spain, I walked for 40 days, and there's actually a podcast out there right now called the Dallas Willard Podcast. And I felt drawn. I had been listening to it, but not regularly. But I felt drawn to actually take Dallas with me on the Camino, and he became my mentor on a daily basis. I listened to a podcast episode a day.
If you
Uh,
take Willard with you on the Camino, that's like walking with the Trinity.
I had Dallas on one side. I felt like I had Jesus on the other. I
I
was
mean,
hemmed in
you were
behind, and
good. You were in good hands. You
I
were in.
felt like it. So yeah, so you were really impacted by Dallas. I was impacted by you. I'm so grateful for the way God maneuvered our lives, Rebecca and I, to meet you and Gwen when we did.
Rebecca was my first admin assistant, and were it not for your wife, there would be no Potter's Inn, because she held me together, showed me she's so gifted in terms of her admin and accounting procedures, and she just saved our life and put us in order and kept me organized, and really with her is how I wrote most of my books, especially the first few books that I came out.
Mhm.
Rebecca typed them up and helped me edit them, and so she's responsible for this madness.
Well, truly, you all have played a significant role in our lives as well, and I want to thank you for that. Even the vision, Steve, of LifePoint Resources came from the Potter's Inn and the work you all were doing with pastors, ministry leaders. So I'm curious. I feel like I want to just ask you this question. It's almost a mentoring question for me before we dig into your new book, and I'm so excited. But as you look back on your days leading that groundbreaking, pioneering, really soul care ministry, what did you cherish most? Also, I was curious. We're kind of in beginning year 5 of our ministry. If you could go back and do it all over again, Steve, what would you do differently?
Oh, I would wish I could be myself now.
Hmm.
25 years ago, I I was learning so much. I was on the cusp. I was fresh in my own resurrection with Dallas. He literally resuscitated me and brought me back to life, kind of put those big paddles on my heart and brought me back and taught me so much. And it just took a long time, Adam. In that beautiful poem, Trust in the Slow Work of God, I think if I could do it all over and give you any words, is that word, trust in the slow work, and get hurry out of the way. That's
Hmm.
Dallas's big mantra: eliminate ruthlessly hurry from our lives.
Hmm.
And I think I was in a hurry. I was in a hurry to build a retreat. I was in a hurry to write books. I was in a hurry to help people. And now that I look on it, I just thought, what was the speed? What was the hurry all about? I think that came from unhealthy places.
Hmm.
Now that I'm retiring and unplugging and on my beautiful life of greening that we'll talk about here in a moment, um, I just see that speed is really one of the forces that opposes the spiritual life.
Hmm.
Our rush to do everything, even in excellence, Adam, that's hard for those of you guys who are ones on the Enneagram that value excellence and are driven by excellence. But I think it gets in the way of the messy spiritual life. As you know, it's very messy.
Hmm.
And so it just takes time to learn, and especially this word, to unlearn some of the things we assumed were true and right. Education is really more about unlearning than I think it is learning.
Hmm. Hmm. So you would take the greening you today, the you who has come to understand the slow work of God, and put yourself maybe back in that place 25 years ago and
Yeah, I
go a
don't
little
have the
slower.
energy to do what I did then, and I
Mm.
would do it all differently. I would go about it much more slowly. And though we were a small ministry, I think I would want to celebrate and stay in the few, rather
Mm-hmm.
than the many.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to do that knowing, there's a verse in Mark 3:14 that says Jesus chose the few that he might be with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you and Rebecca were part of my few, David Saxemeyer, so many others that came in. I was just looking at a staff picture, Adam, and you're in it when we
Mm-hmm.
celebrated Christmas at our barn. But my life has really grown, and I've had many opportunities as I go around the potter's wheel. Still at 71, I'm just finding there are many opportunities for those hands to reshape me,
Mm-hmm.
to give me another turn on the wheel to get it right, and to really let go, and to tell the potter, have your own way, time and
Mm-hmm.
time again.
Is that what you cherish most about this journey you've been on?
I cherish, I really, Gwen and I often say, if Potter's Inn was just for us, it was enough.
Mm-hmm.
If it was just for me, because I've been so stubborn and so strong and so much I had to let go of, that I really needed those 35 acres to walk and to pray and to think. I needed that barn where animals found haven, and the stench of all that 3 feet of manure that you saw in that barn before it was a retreat center. It was a llama barn. And that's really the appropriate space for spiritual transformation, is in the stench of a barn. And maybe that's why Jesus was born in one.
Yeah, that's good, Steve. That just looks like it just came to you so naturally.
Well, I wasn't reading it, man. I've lived this. I've lived it.
And it just makes me smile. Yeah. Wow. I think one of the times I was most impressed. I've always been impressed with you in the room with people, but one time I went to a church down in Colorado Springs where you were standing with a room full of staff. It's a mega church. You had a relationship with them. They let you come in and lead them into some kind of soul care conversations. Um, the background you had coming out of large church, big staff, all that kind of stuff gave you a special heart for folks who are on that kind of wheel, a hamster wheel.
Right.
And watching you speak from the depths of your heart and lived experience of there's a better way to do life with God. Not to say you have to leave the ministry, but there's a way in which to engage God in a slower, yeah, everything that you were bringing to them in that space. I remember watching that and trying to articulate to you like, man, when you're on in that kind of a space and the spirit is just moving in you, oh, it's a deep well. I remember being so moved by that. And of course, you brought that deep with you, that deep well with you in all of your writing, all of it. You're a prolific writer. You've authored some deeply impactful books, for me included, The Lazarus Life, Embracing Soul Care, many books. And your latest book is called Greening, Poems in the Unfolding of Our Lives. And this is your first collection of poetry. So that's why we're here to talk about your greening, Steve. I'm curious, yeah, what does greening mean to you?
Mhm. Well, greening, I wish I could say it was original with me, that term and word, but I found that word in my own dark time after I left Potter's Inn. After I left the ministry I had founded, we moved to North Carolina, and it was very difficult. Those were the years of COVID. Shutdown happened. We couldn't go to church. We couldn't feel connected. We couldn't find our friends. We had left our life in Colorado, the world, our team, and we were starting over. And on top of it, I had two medical crises, two surgeries, and it was a dark time. And in that dark time, I discovered the word greening, really out of my own dark age, my own wintering. And it was a term that a woman in the 12th century named Hildegard of Bingen, who was a woman that lived in the Benedictine community, And she wrote about the greening, renewing work of God, and that God can take a stump, and out of a stump comes a beautiful tendril
Mm.
green shoot. And as she began to use that, and in my own stump life, kind of
Mm.
feeling cut off from everybody and everything, not finding a church, feeling like my health, after I had written the books, Adam, after I had
Mhm.
led Potterson, I had really gone into a dark age, similar to the dark ages of the world in the 12th century, of the European world. But Hildegard said that we green through our darkness,
Mm.
that it takes darkness, hard times for us to green. And in the book, I write an essay that introduces this whole section on pruning, which is what I was going through that time. And I just said, there is no flourishing, no vibrancy, no greening, no real or lasting reaping and harvesting without some form of pruning.
Mhm.
And I think I was shocked that after all I had been through, that I would need to be pruned that deeply, but I was really cut back. And in my cutting back, I had to admit my own exhaustion again. And I was in a ministry devoted to helping people not be exhausted.
Mhm.
But I was just so bone tired and so weary. I was the recipient of the beautiful words of Jesus. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out? And I had to come say, after I had written all the books, I am.
Mm.
I'm so sorry, but I am.
Mm.
And here I am yet again. And in that time, Gwen and I decided to get out of Charlotte, to start over and move to the mountains
Mm.
of North Carolina, which are green, unlike the mountains of Colorado. These are green and softer and beautiful. I live in a valley. I'm surrounded by mountains. And in this setting, Adam, is where I began to really green and come back to life through the nature, through being cocooned around me. And so
Mhm.
my poems that I began to write were written kind of as a testimony of my stump life, my pruning life, my cutting back, the beginning of greening, the beginning of flourishing again,
Mm.
and the beginning of really loving my life, of
Mm.
really loving my life. And that's where the word greening just became the telltale word for me. So it became the perfect title for this book,
Mhm.
Greening Poems in
Mhm.
the Unfolding of Life.
Mhm. Mm. So, I remember when we were together in Colorado, I think, Enneagram language was kind of popular back then. You you thought you were a 3. I remember
I,
that.
I came to everybody, the staff, to everybody and said, I am a 3. And come to find out, I learned I was not a 3. I am a 4.
Uh-huh.
I have a 3 wing, but boy, in my 4-ness, this beautiful teacher, Marty McMain, who lives in Boulder, was my mentor in the Enneagram, the best teacher on the Enneagram I've ever sat with. And she worked with me. She said, I asked her, Marty, how'd you sleep last night? She stayed at our retreat center. She said, I didn't sleep. I was up all night reading your books. You're not a 3.
Mhm.
And I said, what are you talking about? She said, let's sit down. And she began to pull out of me really the essence of my true self.
Mhm.
And, it's that saying, Adam, when the student is ready, the master will
Mhm.
come. And there are these seasons all in my life that I had to get ready. I couldn't receive the truth until I was really ready.
Yeah.
And greening came at a time that I was ready to be green. And it's in my retirement. I'm
Yeah.
71. And that's what makes it so rare and kind of anti cultural and anti counterintuitive, I should say, to green when you're aging like I'm aging and realize that I'm actually experiencing a part of the abundant life that I had only read about in books.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, it sounds like Marty was giving you permission to, well, to live from like a kind of a different narrative. I can understand why, if you had come from a really large kind of a mega church mindset, huge church pastor platform story, a 3. is, if you were to look and go, oh, I think I'm a three, and a lot of other people point to you as going, oh yeah, you're probably a three. You get up there, you do your thing. It's all about image and all this kind of stuff. Um, to have the freedom, almost to have someone come with a key and just help unlock a chain is what it feels like has happened a bit for you, and kind of discovery, because it gave you the permission to use the actual words and language. I think that I see in your book and in your poems of a four, this idea of a longing to really to belong, and this sense of melancholy. I think you even used the word melancholy. I'm telling you all this because you might think I'm a one. I also am a four, and have struggled with at that for.
Now that you're saying that, it just like, of course you're a
Yeah,
four. I
yeah.
mean, that makes perfect
But
sense.
if I were to write a book on the Enneagram, it would be how I tried on every number of the Enneagram and ended up where I started.
There's
because
a poem about that.
because I didn't want to
After all
be
our
that.
learning, we come back and recognize the place that we're in, but we
Right.
know it now. We know
As
it.
Yeah, we know it for the first time, right? And yeah, but the one for me is kind of like I can move to that. I can resource some of that in times of health, but no, for a lot of my life it was deep melancholy, and kind of not having the permission, I felt like, to use that as part of my story. I actually felt like there was something deficient in me because I wasn't a three. If only I was a three, then maybe I would have loved my job, in ministry, for example. But it's just interesting how this all works. But I'm so glad that God, through Marty, gave you this permission to expand your narrative, and kind of land at what is actually most true about you, because now you can bring this gift into the world with the freedom and like the just unabashed, this is me. I love some of the work you've been doing on Substack, just kind of saying why poetry,
Yeah.
and you're just naming so many things, that's like, well, the world might say
Right.
poetry is not helpful for this productive kind of life, but we're talking about a different kind of life, and this life matters too, right? So everything you're
That's
doing,
right.
everything you're writing, it's unlocked something in you that I think the world needs. We need. Your books are incredible, but I guess maybe the question I would have for you is, what has poetry unlocked in you that prose didn't?
Mhm. That's such a good question because poetry is really the fruit of my greening. And as I began to find how to say what was happening in me, I needed to say it in fewer words
Mm,
than a 5,000 word chapter. That's the about the book, the word count of any chapter of a book you read that you buy or read. And I wanted to say it less because I needed to distill
mm,
to the essence of this new truth and this new experience that I was having.
mhm,
And poetry, Adam, is really a portal into the inner world. This is why all Enneagram types write poetry. We're not limited to just being a four, but
mhm,
every Enneagram, every personality, every gender, every culture, there are
mhm,
people who turn to words to really get it out. Poetry
mm,
is getting it out. And that's like, as a musician, you get it out through song. This is saying it in fewer words and distilling the essence. And then I love this, that in poetry, you can say it a little bit slant, you can use metaphor and nuance, all of the primary teaching tools that Jesus used, nuance and metaphor, not literalism, not black and white, not in a dualistic way, but in a colored way, in a magnificent way, in an enthralling way, in an inspiring way, to read a poem and you just feel so naked. You feel so seen. It's just like, how did she write that?
mhm,
How did Mary Oliver say, someone gave me a box of darkness and in that box I discovered there was a gift?
mhm,
How did she write the words, The heart, in the heart has many dungeons. Bring the light, bring the light.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like only a poem can say that. Only a poet can say that. And Paul was the master here in many ways. He really got this right when he said we are God's poem. That's a verse in Ephesians. We are God's poem. We are the succinct distilled essence of his essence, and we are God's poem. That's a magnificent, mind-blowing verse. So anybody that struggles with poetry, and that's most of us, most of us struggle with poetry from the trauma we got from a ninth grade or 12th grade English teacher in high school that just banged it into our head about Shakespeare's sonnets, and we just thought, this makes no sense. Get out of my life. Get out of my life. Let me go live my life. But poetry really is, we need to return to this, Adam, because in this day of political divide and trauma in our world, and who said this and who said this, and the trouble in the world, poetry is a bridge, really, to help us find each other. You're crossing over to me today. I'm crossing over to you through poetry, not through facts, not through linear left brain way of factual amassing of more knowledge. We're going to find each other through the heart, through the heart. And that's, poetry is the bridge, it's the pathway to speak and to be heard, to see and to be seen, is really through a poem.
My mind went back to inauguration day for President Biden.
Yes.
And I can't remember the name of the poet laureate who
Amanda
spoke.
Gorman. Amanda Gorman. She stood up in that red coat and that yellow hat and that iconic image, and she stood there and quoted that poem, and it was mesmerizing, and we were enthralled with that. And Robert Frost, I just read his story when when John F. Kennedy was inaugurated president. He had Robert Frost come up and stand and recite a poem, and Robert Frost forgot the poem that he was going to quote and reached into his pocket and on a little scribbly piece of paper read an older poem, and that was the inauguration poem. It's like poetry, we need words to help us make sense of this chaotic life we are living. We have to find adjectives and adverbs and new verbs and new nouns to give us the 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 groans in our heart, Adam, are articulated through our poems and through our prayers. And this is exactly what David did. His groanings, which were too deep for words, he wrote down his poems, and his poems became the book of Psalms, which became the literal prayer book of Jesus Christ. Jesus read those poems, memorized those poems, quoted those poems. And in those poems that David wrote in his agony and his ecstasy, half of them written in his agony, half of them written in his ecstasy, David and a few other people wrote all of the 150, the longest book of the Bible, the Psalms. So we must rethink this 30, 45-minute sermon that we're doing in these churches, trying to teach, preach. What we need really is more time to reflect, more time to catch our breath, more time to hear it in Lectio style, hearing a passage, even in a sermon, Lectio style. Let me read this again for you. Now let me read it again for you. Now just sit and let me read it one more time for you. And let the word become living and active and sharper than the two-edged sword, which it is. And let that word penetrate to the fourth quadrant of our heart so that we can find light and find freedom.
I think now would be a good time to stop talking about poetry and actually give voice to some poetry.
I would love to do that.
I would love for you to do that.
I would
I
love to read one to start with, which is why I read and why I use poetry. And
okay.
it's a poem in the book, Adam, called Old Poets.
Okay.
And I I just want to read it for us and we'll talk about it. Old Poets. I read poems every day. Nothing else seems to make sense anymore. So many competing narratives, countless false words. Poems offer a certainty that sets me free somehow. Like this morning, I read a poem by a Buddhist monk. I am not a Buddhist, but he made me feel like one, all aware of or halfway awake to what is around me, in me, above me, and beyond me. It was a language I knew, though I do not speak that poet's mother tongue. Poems lift the soul into flight like a white egret, lifting itself from the pond, sailing through the air with no thought of the ground beneath their feet. The news is noise. It's just noise, and perhaps that's all it really is. But a poem has the cadence of a life beyond the now and here. And when I read a poem, I know I am not alone. The poem is a map to an inner life that is still so alive and young. It is a river inviting me to wade in and float in the flow. I lose touch with the bottom where rocks and dead logs lie. What is this joy that finds me in the verse, that brings me into the peace of a poem? In metaphor and stanza, I live in solidarity with all the old poets in China, whom I have never met, but know me.
Hmm.
That's why I read poems, because I find myself, their story becomes my story. Their song becomes my song. Their ache helps me name my ache. Their storm helps me identify my storm. And their finding peace is a pathway for me to find peace.
Mm.
This is the beauty of poetry. And Adam, you asked me that question, what would I do differently? You know, back when I was with you in 2000, I started flirting with poems. I would
Mhm.
read them often in sessions. But if I were to do it all over again, I would just stick to poetry. I would just say, let us just read every day. Let us read a few poems and let us do a Lectio Divina and call it a day. I think I taught way too much, and that's part of that slowing that I would just said, let's slow this down. Let's just get one nugget, one pearl of great price, one treasure buried in a field. If we can get that, then we can go on our day. And I really do think that was the philosophy of how Jesus taught. But
Mm.
it took me a long time to at least think that I've got a little bit of understanding on this today. 71 years and still going.
Well, just like Marty, who you talked about earlier, read all your books and said, Steve, you're four. uh, I would want to say, when you're reading that poem, what I realized hearing you read it was different than reading it on the page. But hearing you read it, I felt, Steve, that's how you always, that's what came to life in you when I would comment. Wow, when you're in the room with people doing what you do, kind of without notes extemporaneously, you are a poet at heart.
Mm,
And what I love is that you're greening and saying, and here I am, and here's what I get to be.
mm,
Yeah. And I understand that what you're saying about how you'd maybe go back and teach less, but I would have to say the way I experienced you, the way most people would have experienced you is it wasn't your teaching. It was the poetic essence and how you taught with metaphor and how you just you helped unlock so many other people's hearts in a very slow space. You, even if things were turning inside you, you were giving that gift to those of us who were around you. So I just want to encourage you to say whatever is greening in you today is something that has been um, being nurtured for a long time. You
It's
talked
been
about,
nurtured. And this is the same for all of us. This
yeah.
is why I wrote the book, why Hildegard chose that beautiful message of greening, that greening is possible. And when I was with you, Adam, and the theme of many of my books about the exhausted life and people saying there has to be more than what I've been told, there has to be more than what the church is teaching me. And 25 years ago, I said there is more. It's following the ways of Jesus.
Mm,
And I would often say the exhausted life is not the abundant life.
mhm,
And now I would say it in this way, in a
mm,
poetic way, is that the abundant life is inner greening because it's about really, really greening in your inner life. This world is so fragile and so dark and so hurting. We want to care for the world and the people in the world, but Adam, we can't do that unless we green. We cannot give what we do not have. And it's just like the airline flight attendants first put the oxygen mask on yourself. And unless we're greening, those of us in the ministry space, those of us who are spiritual directors, oh my goodness, those of us that are in any caring place, any caring vocation, doctors, unless we green and we continue to green, we offer the stumpness of our life, the same old. And that becomes a yoke of religion. And that, dear friend, is what I think the modern church in America might be guilty of, is offering the stump of a religion rather than the greening, beautiful tendrils of Jesus Christ.
Hey, if anybody's listening right now and you're feeling the way I do, mark the time in this podcast and go back and listen to that again. That is gold. What you just did for us, Steve. You just said, here's what teaching would have looked like. I would have said the abundant life is not the exhausted life. But today I would say the abundant life is, and then everything you shared about greening, that's it. That's the difference.
I appreciate that, Adam, so much. When you were in Spain a couple of months ago, and I had no idea you were in Spain, but you were there teaching in your spiritual direction program, which is so beautiful for me to know about. I didn't even know about that till today. But you told me that you had read one of my poems, and I think it was Green as My Heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if I could read that one. And
Yes.
you and I could dialogue, and I'd like to know why this touched you so
Okay.
much. But let me read this for us. It's called Green is My Heart. It's in the last section. There are 6 sections of
Mm-hmm.
poems in the book, and each section has a little essay where I'm introducing the theme. And this is in the theme called Greening, the
Mm-hmm.
title of the book. Green is my heart. My heart reveals many colors. Red for the life I've lived so far, blackness for the darkness I felt, blue when I spiraled down with deep loss. But now, green is the hue within. How this happened is not my story, but that it did occur is. I am but a witness of my own resurrection. At first, the soft tendrils of promise appeared, young and tender growth from such an old stump, unfurling and expanding life within. I arise today, each day to rise again. The four quadrants of my heart now green, light sage, brilliant emerald, soft serpentine, and in the fourth, a jade from the east, stages and phases of such a green life now. It is not for me to ask how long this green will remain. Today is the day to spring forth into this aching world. I'm not wasting my breath on wishing for another life. Green will do. Yes, green is my life. Why did you pick that poem and tell
Hmm.
me it meant so much to you, Adam?
There's a lot in that poem, but especially the final stanza, um, uh, where you say it's not for me to wonder how long
It's
this will
not for me to
last.
ask how long this will last.
Yeah. Um, and there's another part too about kind of wishing you had had another life.
Mm,
That, when you met Rebecca and I in 2009, I think it was, um, I I could have definitely told you then with um, great passion. I would have loved to have a different story than the story I had found myself in. How did I get there? What was the soul damage that had been carried with me through my young years, my growing up years, my college years, my early ministry years, my early fatherhood, our marriage, that got me to the place where I was so jacked up, um, from an identity level, not feeling so much pride and hubris, but quite the opposite, like deep down despair of like failure. And
mm,
if I could have any other life, um, and it was no one else's fault but mine. And so I think there's something in there where you're saying I'm done wasting my breath, wasting my time, over wishing there had been another story that I had been in, really, because what I'm most interested in celebrating right now is this sense of green. Greening is happening today. This is the moment I'm in, and this is a beautiful moment to be with God. And I think I was in Spain that, in October when I read that. You sent it to me. I read it. I really connected with you, but it really took me back to earlier this summer when I was walking the Camino, Steve, in
mm,
northern Spain. And I found that here I am, 53 years old, almost 53 at the time when I was walking, going, why did it take me so long to get to this place where I needed the physicality, the embodied, the space to do nothing but walk
mm,
and pay attention to what's around me, what's in here,
mm.
how I'm experiencing and encountering delight with God just
Yes.
by being me,
Yeah.
right? And I needed that experience to say something similar to what I read in your poem. When you shared that with me, I was like, that's it.
That is it. And that's exactly, I mean, to hear you speak is stirs up a lot of emotion in me because when we moved to Brevard to save our life again and to move out of Charlotte, the big bank city, the bustling, wealthy city, and it was suffocating. I wasn't doing well. I was used to beautiful mountains. Place really matters, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, in our spiritual life. But we were walking along the Davidson River. We live at a confluence of rivers here, the French Broad and the Davidson, where the hurricane came and flooded. And this was prior to the hurricane. We were walking down that beautiful river, and I just stopped on the path and I told Gwen, why did this take so long to get here?
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me, you know how wise Gwen is, right? She said, It took all of that past to get
Mm-hmm.
us ready for this.
Mm-hmm.
And Adam, your past and my past, it has all gone into us. You
Mm-hmm.
would not be a spiritual director
Mm-hmm.
had you not had your past.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't. You wouldn't be qualified. You're a broken man, and no spiritual director who is not broken is not a spiritual director.
Mm-hmm.
We can only love out of our brokenness. We can only heal out of our woundedness. And now you're a healer. I'm a healer, but we're wounded healers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gives us the invitation to say thank you to my
Yeah.
past, no
Right.
matter how dark it was. Thank you. Thank you to my fundamentalist past. That's hard for people to say because they want to take an axe and chop
Mm.
off the fundamentalist, conservative, boxed religion that they were born in, and people want to get free of it. And it's all about freedom. I get that. I know that. I wanted it too.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? Your past, even in the most conservative, fundamental, boxed up way, gave you this pathway to finally be free.
Mm.
Now you know what you need to be free from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the yoke of religion and
Yeah.
experience the easy yoke of Jesus.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm,
Yeah. Thank you. I feel like there are people who are going to need to hear this conversation and are listening even now. You are on our hearts right now as we talk. Each person listening. We've already prayed for you before we started too. So
yes.
yeah. Yeah. You talk about, like a resurgence of a soul, and you've been very open, Steve, about a cool resurgence of your own soul, including pilgrimage,
Mm,
including going over to Scotland.
yes. Gwen and I
And
went to Iona this past year, and it
uh-huh.
was a deep encounter. It was a pilgrimage. And pilgrimage, as you know, Adam, is a necessary spiritual practice. Blessed are those who set their heart on pilgrimage. And so
Mhm,
we are missing a blessing when we don't go. And that's when Jesus, by the way, as a young boy, 12 years old, he was on
mhm,
pilgrimage when his parents were taking him to Jerusalem. And that's where he said, I need to be about my father's house. He told that to Mary and Joseph.
mhm,
I've got greater business to
mhm,
do than to play with the boys here and play with the girls. I need to be about my father's work. I mean, pilgrimage is the soil of transformation because we have space and time to relax, to go at our own pace. We're not clip,
mhm,
clip, clip. We're not checking boxes. We're not
mhm,
chop, chop, chop. We're just moving in a cadence and a beautiful rhythm. And that's what's so wrong in American Western Christianity is that we have no rhythm. Everything is urgent. We're living by
mhm,
the tyranny of the urgent. And oh, by
mhm.
the way, Sunday comes every 6 days.
Hey, yeah. Yeah, I just felt triggered just now. Sorry. Um,
Sorry.
that's okay. No, um, you also led a pilgrimage right there in North Carolina, and I wonder if you'll continue doing that.
Well, when we were moving here, it just dawned on me, why isn't there a Camino de Blue Ridge? Here we are
Yeah.
in the oldest mountain, second oldest in the world. And that's what they say, anyhow. I don't know how they figure that out. But so we did a walking retreat on the Blue Ridge Parkway and into the forest. And
Mm,
it was glorious. We took 30 people
mm,
for 5 days and we walked and wept and wept
mm,
and laughed and ate and we connected in a deep way.
mm,
And
mm.
there's a poem in here called "A Blessing on Pilgrimage." Could I
That
read a
is a
part of that
great
one?
poem. Thank you for including that. That one's going to stay with me.
Yeah, here it is. And let me just turn to it. It's such a good one. I'll just read a few verses. Blessed are those who set their feet on pilgrimage, for we shall seek and find. Blessed are those who come from the ends of the earth, for in pilgrimage we find our way. And let me just say, it doesn't have to be a pilgrimage to Spain or a pilgrimage to Iona. my son Leighton, who you know is on pilgrimage this very day at Sacred Heart
Mm,
up in Denver, where he's
mm,
taking 3 days off of work
yeah.
doing a silent retreat. That's
Mm,
his pilgrimage. Blessed are those who come expectant, for our reward will be revealed in tears of joy.
mm,
And I'll end with this one. Blessed are those who find themselves on a journey, for we shall realize the journey is the destination.
mhm, mhm. Powerful. Yeah, thank you for including that poem. Beautiful. Um, okay, on your Camino de Blue Ridge, something really cool happened. You talked about eating and walking and praying and crying and laughing. Something else happened. Your own resurgence of soul. You were rebaptized, weren't you?
Oh, we're going to have to make me get totally naked today. We were hiking. This is the land of many waterfalls. There's 300 waterfalls in the county where I live. And it's a beautiful place. And we were walking and this place by three magnificent waterfalls, and it hit me. It wasn't really like something I hadn't thought. I've been thinking all along that in
Mhm,
my new understanding and my new life and my new greening, I wanted to be baptized, but I had only told Gwen. And there we come into these three waterfalls, and it just hit me. And I went to Gwen and I said, I'm ready. This is my day. And so I went up to some of the friends on the Camino without even announcing. I didn't want it to be a show. And I just said, "Hey, I'm going to go in, and I would love for you to form a circle around me, and I'd
mhm,
love for you to stand with me and help me, but help baptize me." And so we went and
mhm,
stood by this magnificent waterfall, and it was really in the understanding of that word at my age. I was baptized when I was 5 years old, and I didn't have a clue. I really got baptized because my older sister
mhm,
got baptized. I was the youngest in the family. And I've probably baptized like many, many people, Adam, in my life and my work. But in this new place that I'm at, I just thought I wanted to literally go into the water. I
mhm,
wanted to be baptized into the glory of God's creation, which is the literal meaning that when Jesus was baptized, he went into the water, into creation, into the
mhm,
glory,
mhm,
and experienced the kinship and the camaraderie and the collegiality with all of creation. It
mhm.
wasn't just a sprinkle, he went into it. And that's what I wanted. And so my friends made a circle around me, and I was baptized. And when I was standing there, I don't know if you saw that picture, but a trout jumped up the waterfall.
I did. I
And
saw it.
it just like a lady on our Camino captured that with her camera. And I just thought, how interesting, because it was so electric for me
Mm,
at 71 to wade into that water with my friends. That water must have been so charged with
mm,
electricity that that
mm.
trout had to jump out of it. And so I say, Jesus got the dove and I got a trout.
What I hear in that, and what I see in the book Greening, and all the pages is just pure and utter freedom
Mm.
and
Freedom is a
delight.
big word. Freedom is a big word. Delight is a big word. And I hope you'll find hope in this, Adam, because you're 20 years behind me. It's going to get better.
Mm,
Your journey is going to get better. And it may still not go the way you think, but it's just like we're all, I think, on a greening journey, and that involves pruning, and it involves different, cutting back, and there's different seasons to this. I just talk about that in the book, Greening. But I'm just so happy that at my stage in life, I remember Dallas Willard telling me, and I was 41 or so when I went to Dallas, maybe mid 40s. I can't remember how old I was, but it was in 1996. He just said, Steve, all the words of Jesus are true. All the words of Jesus are true. And Adam, that's what I want to tell you,
Hmm.
that all of the words of Jesus are true about abundant life. It's not prosperity. It's not in the Joel Osteen way of bigger house and square footage. It is not, it is not, it is not. But it is in the expansiveness of our heart and the kindling of the fire within. And this is what the desert fathers and desert mothers strove to experience when they fled Alexandria and Egypt and Syria and they went into the deserts. They were after their own greening. Though the world was going to fall away and Rome was going to implode, they wanted their own greening. And you know what? I think we're in a place and time that we need to heed the words of the desert fathers and mothers. And we need to be about our greening. And as we green and as we collectively green, then we can offer that greening
Yeah.
back to the world. But I think what we've been doing is offering our stumpness and
Hmm.
our dark age and calling that the greening life. And the greening life is an abundant life.
Thank you. Wise words, tender, loving words. Those who are listening, I would love for them to be able to engage your work, Steve. Buy the book, read your regular writing on Substack. Can you give us just some information about how we can stay connected to you, how we can find the book, all the good stuff?
Yeah, it is. And I'd love for people to be connected because we're all resourcing. Adam, you resource. That's really what you're doing. And that's what I still want to do. But pottersin.com, pottersin, pottersin.com. That's where you can find greening, all the links there. And you can buy the book. It's available on Amazon and it's available on Kindle and it's available in a bulk kind of
Mhm.
quantity that you can get for a discount. So for me, it's really about making this message known and doing it differently than I did before in prose. You know, I think all the books that I wrote, they are right here. But greening, if I could just say, if there's something I want to be remembered for, it is this book, because this book feels closer to the bullseye for me.
Mhm.
I think all my life in pilgrimage, I've been about moving closer on the bullseye to that deep,
Yep.
beautiful center. And greening is it so far. I don't know what's coming next, and I'm not going to say, but for this, and it isn't it interesting that it took poetry for me to express this, that I really couldn't get my hands around it. In the Lazarus Life, which is the most successful book, kind of the best-selling book that I wrote, translated in lots of languages, I came very close, but I remember trying to write the final chapter in the Lazarus Life to define what is the abundant life that Jesus offered. Well, I wrote that book in 2008. So here it is 2025 or 2026, whenever our listeners are going to hear this. And I see it. I see the abundant life in this beautiful metaphor of greening. And I think this is just a great portal to see it in a fresh way. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Steve, for giving us your time this morning. God bless you.
Thank you, Adam.
Give my best to Gwen, and can't wait until we get a chance to talk again. Bye-bye. Well, as we come to the close of our time today, I'm struck by how Steve's story reminds us that renewal doesn't just belong to youth or to beginnings. It belongs to every season of our lives, especially those that feel like endings, transitions, or uncertainties. There's a phrase in Steve's book, Greening, that I keep hearing in my heart. This idea that our lives are unfolding, not being forced or mastered, not being optimized, just unfolding like a leaf curling outward toward the sun without knowing how, or a river that, as Wendell Berry once wrote, reveals what it was, is, and will be as it grows calm. Many of us try to carry our lives like a resume, what we've built, what we've accomplished, how productive we are. But poetry invites us to carry our lives like a prayer, to listen, to attend, to receive. Maybe that's the invitation for us today. Where's God asking you to stop managing your life and start listening to it? Where is something greening in you, quietly, gently, in places you may have ignored? Maybe you feel like a tree in winter, but something in you is preparing to bud. Maybe you feel like you're walking a path you've already walked, but this time you're walking it awake. Or maybe you're discovering, like Steve did, that the truest parts of you are emerging now, after years of believing you'd already figured yourself out. So I want to leave you with one question to carry into prayer. What new tenderness is God inviting you to welcome in this season of your unfolding life? Let it sit with you. Let it breathe. Let it unfold. Thank you, Steve, for sharing your heart, for sharing your art and your story with us. And thank you for listening today. Grace and peace to you as your own greening continues.